Okay, hello. Buenos dias, buenas tardes, everybody. It's me, Profesor, and as you can clearly see, I'm not recording outside for a very good reason. Right now, it's already up in the high 90s, maybe 100. As I mentioned in the announcement to start this week, temperatures have been in the hundreds already, triple digits, and that's going to be the case for a few more days. And it looks like there might be some thunderstorms, that remnants of that hurricane off the coast of Cabo San Lucas, San Jose del Cabo. Probably within a couple of days, some of that stuff might make its way over here. And last month we had a couple of freak thunderstorms that just came into the area, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's another round of that coming up in the next couple of days. So if there is, I'll definitely keep you posted and let you know about that in the announcement section. So look at it this way: besides the class topics, I guess my announcements also give you a preview in terms of what the weather is like in the Inland Empire area. All right, well listen. Today, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the readings for week 5. We just passed the halfway point of the class, and now we're getting into more of the 20th century in terms of events happening in the middle parts of the 20th century. And for this week, the main focus is on the World War II era. So to get things started, let's go ahead right off the bat and check out Chapter 8 from the Crucible of Struggle book. And if you don't mind, since I'm actually a little bit nearsighted, I'm going to go and take my glasses off for the rest of the video, so I can see what I have here on my clipboard. Okay, all right, that's a little bit better. But yes, in this chapter, Vargas does a really good job of giving you a panorama of what life was like for Mexican Americans, for Chicanos during the World War II period. Of course, Chicanos and Chicanas, they served the country admirably, of course, during the war effort. Two of my distant cousins, these were first cousins of my abuelita. They both served in the war. One of them served in Europe. He drove jeeps. I think he was a mechanic. He was a quartermaster. So when it came to supplies, he was in that part of the war effort, serving mainly in France, and I think in Belgium too. And then the other relative of mine, my grandmother's other cousin, he served in the Pacific. He was in one of the Pacific islands. I forget exactly which island it was. My abuelita's been gone for over 10 years now, but I think my mother knows a little bit in terms of where my distant cousin served. So I'll probably talk to her a little bit more about that. But in any case, Vargas again gives you a great panorama of many of the issues facing Chicanos during the World War II era, and of course the rest of the module will elaborate upon that. Okay, now once you finish off with the Vargas reading, I want to go ahead and switch gears and give us more of a sense of what's happening on the world stage, and check out the Parker program about Hitler. Even though the topics don't really correlate too much with respect to I guess you might say the day-to-day issues that were relevant to to Chicanos, whether it's in San Diego, whether it's in Los Angeles, San Antonio, Dallas, Detroit, Chicago, New York, wherever. I think what the program does is it gives you a sense of what it was, what was the thing, the elements, the ideas that Americans were fighting against back in those days. Of course, besides Germany, there was the Axis powers, there was Italy and Japan also. So by having those three powers, the Axis powers, that definitely gave a sense that World War II was, you might say, the good war. This is stuff that the NBC newsman Tom Brokaw wrote about in his book from many years ago, The Greatest Generation. And in many respects, it was the greatest generation, not just because of the people fighting World War II, but because they had to live through the Great Depression during the previous decade. So in essence, what the program illustrates is an idea of how a totalitarian regime works, how it comes to power, how it's able to manipulate the democratic process, because Germany already had some democratic traditions before that, but Hitler was able to take advantage of that, play upon the disenchantment that Germans had after World War I. And as you know, This year, 2014, is the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. So even though it's been a century since that war started, the effects of that war permeated the rest of the 20th century and into modern times too. And I would argue that the situation happening in the Middle East with Iraq, Syria, ISIL, or whatever those lunatics call themselves, all of that has a lot of connection with what happened in World War I and the aftermath. This stuff I get into a lot more detail in my Grossman College Modern U.S. History class, but a lot of those issues do percolate and really have some impact with respect to the day-to-day lives of Chicanos. And I think Vargas does a pretty good job of touching upon that. But I wanted to give you more of a sense of the details about Hitler and the Nazi government, Nazi regime with a PowerPoint program. All right, after you finish off with the Hitler program, I'll go ahead now and take a look at the readings in Beyond 1848. Start with Albert Camarillo's section about Luisa Morena and the Congress of Mexican and Spanish-speaking people, or El Congreso de Pueblos que Hablan Español. What Camarillo is really doing is giving you a sense of how during the New Deal period into World War II, Chicanos, Chicanas, they mobilized for important causes. And Moreno, in essence, she paved the way for a lot of others to come on the scene in the 1950s, and of course more so for the 60s. So people like Fred Ross, Dolores Huerta, Cesar Chavez, Gil Padilla, and Larry Eatleyoung, and many of the other early leaders with respect to the United Farm Workers, a lot of them, you might say, got their roots or got their got their ideas, their sense of how to organize and galvanize by what Moreno did back in the 1930s and into the 1940s. And what made things really helpful for Moreno and other groups at the time was the fact that that's during the New Deal period in the 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, had his program. And on that note too, you might be aware that this week on PBS there's the series, another Ken Burns series. Ken Burns was the guy who did the Civil War program back in 1990, and he's done many other things since then. He's done programs on American jazz, on baseball, on the West, and a few others too that escape me right now. But your program right now on the Roosevelts, that's Franklin, Theodore, and Eleanor. That's going on right now, so if you have time, check it out. Watch some of the installments. Of course, Burns' programs are very lengthy. They run many hours. This one being no exception. So if you have time to check out part of it, definitely check it out. But more so, try to watch the programs in which FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, is the president, because what FDR does in terms of the New Deal, that gave a lot of, shall we say, political space for a lot of groups to organize, and the Congress, the Congreso, with Moreno and many others, that fit into the context of this whole notion of organizing and galvanizing during the New Deal period. All right. Now, while we're on the topic of farm workers, let's check out the article by Erasmo Gamboa. What Gamboa does is talk about the bracero workers in the Pacific Northwest. And the braceros, where you might say the dirty little secret with respect to sustaining the farm effort, that is the war effort during the World War II period. Because keep in mind, a lot of the farm workers through the 1930s were a lot of Anglo-Americans, not African-Americans too. This is stuff that John Steinbeck wrote about in his epic, The Grapes of Wrath. He talked about the people known as the Okies, the Arkies, the people from Oklahoma, from Arkansas, from North Texas. My abuelito, he did some of that work in the 1930s, so he came across a lot of people from Oklahoma, Arkansas, North and East Texas, those places. But what happened during the war was that as the industry started to go into high gear, whether it was here in Southern California or in the upper Midwest, a lot of the auto factories retooled for the war effort to make planes and tanks and other heavy equipment. A lot of the Anglo-American and African-American farm workers fled the fields and went to the shops. They went to Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago, all of those places. So who were the ones who did all the work? That's when the U.S. government and Mexico entered in the agreement with respect to bringing in the temporary workers, the braceros. And what Gamboa talks about is what the braceros did in the Pacific Northwest. So places like Idaho, Washington, Oregon, the very northern edge of California, those places. These are the things that Gamboa talks about in this very interesting article. Now, while Gamboa focuses in on a more of a rural setting, in terms of an urban setting, Vicky Ruiz in her article talks about the women of this cannery known as the Kelsen cannery, and this is stuff that actually my great grandmother did during the 1940s, 50s, and into the 1960s before she ultimately retired. So when it came to urban work, working in the factories, this is something that my great grandmother did, and both my abuelita and my mom, they have all kinds of stories about what my bis abuela did back in those days. So a lot of the stuff that Ruiz touches upon in her article, you might say hits close to home with some of my family experiences. And one of the things that Ruiz points out too was the fact that the women, they were not afraid to organize and galvanize and mobilize and things of that nature. In fact, if anything, at one point of the article, Ruiz points out how when it came to dealing with some of the goons from the Teamsters who tried to move in, so to speak, they had an interesting way of dealing with it. So I won't give anything away. So just check out the article so you know exactly what's going on. But the other important point too is the fact that is that in this article, Ruiz talks about how the communists were those who played a very important role in organizing people, and also Dorothy Ray Healy, one of the famous communist organizers in U.S. labor history in the 20th century. Her role is also mentioned in the article by Ruiz. Interesting one side note too, before I wrap up with the video here. Of course, during the post-World War II period into the 1950s, the start of the Cold War period, communists, of course, got a really bad name. They were seen as the Reds, that they were evil, they were sinister, they were working with the Soviets, they were this, they were that, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. But the communists from the 1920s and into the 1930s, they were the ones who were the most effective organizers. And as Ruiz points out, they were the ones who were really quite instrumental in helping the ladies at the Kelsen cannery organize. But of course, the 1930s was, you might say, a different time than the 1950s. It's just so funny how communists, maybe they were seen as good guys, good people back in the 1930s, but then 20 years later, 1950s, they were seen as evil, this and that, the John Birch Society, that the communists were under the beds, they were in the bathroom, they were in the chimney, they were on the roof, they were hiding behind the shrubs, the trees, all of that. It's just amazing how within the span of 10, 15, 20 years, politics changes so much, and what was deemed to be good in one era is now deemed to be awful and evil and nasty and wicked in another era. But that's just the way it goes in U.S. politics and U.S. history. Happens time and time again. It's been that way ever since the founding of the nation. Even before that, going back to, you might say, Pilgrim and Puritan times. All right, finally, let's go and wrap things up with a video, and this is the video which you might say underscores just how Chicanos, Mexicanos had, you might say, still this ambivalent status with respect to what's happening in the United States during the World War II period. This is a great film that PBS did about 12 years ago called The Zoot Suit Rights. The actor Hector Elizondo is the one who narrates it, and Elizondo and of course many scholars who were interviewed, and also some of the people who were around at the scene, both the Zoot Suiters and those who hated the Zoot Suiters, especially the ones who were the sailors and the Marines, the soldiers. The ones who came from the South, the Midwest, the East Coast, they came to Los Angeles. They were housed at the Armory, the Navy Armory, where Chavez Ravine is, where the Dodgers, of course, play right now. But back in those days, there was a large naval armory, and a lot of the soldiers and sailors coming from around the country, they were stationed there before they went off to go to the war effort, especially fighting against the Japanese. But for many of these sailors and soldiers, they had no idea what Mexicanos were like, what Chicanos were all about, and when they would go out to the bars, to the saloons, to let off steam, to dance, have a good time, all of that stuff, they came across the Chicanos, or as they were called back in those days, often pejoratively, the Pachucos and the Pachucas too. They were seen as anti-American, they were seen as this and that, and one thing led to another, and this led to two tragic events. One of them was the infamous Sleepy Lagoon murder, which is where the story begins, and then the Zoot Suit Rights themselves, which took place a few months later in spring of 1943. So So between those two events, that's what the story focuses in on. But there are a lot of other important events too, which took place before that, and of course after that as well. There are also issues of fears of juvenile delinquency, of the kids running around, who's taking care of the kids. And this is really a big problem because you got to consider that the mother and father, the father, maybe he's off fighting in Germany. He's getting ready to go off to fight against the Japanese. And the mother, maybe she's working in the factories. She's working at the cannery. She's working at the machine shop because, of course, a lot of women went into the industrial roles. That's where the Rosie the Riveter story comes in. So a lot of different currents and ideas and themes colliding in the Los Angeles in the early 1940s. And the film does a great job of untangling all of that stuff. So again, that's the last thing you should look at this week after all of the readings, after the Beyond 1848 stuff, and of course the Crucible of Struggle stuff. Once you get all of that out of the way, then go ahead and check out the Zoot Suit Rides film. All right, well that's the plan for the week. That's the plan for week 5. Again, we're just past the halfway point of the session, so still a few more things to get to. We got the post-war period, of course, the 1960s, the 1970s, and then wrapping things up with events happening at the end of the 19th century, end of the 20th century, with of course the 80s, the 90s, and beyond into modern times. All right, so that's it from here. That's it from the relatively cool conditions here in the French Valley headquarters. Hopefully, if it's nice next week, we'll go back outside and do a video then. All right, so that's it from here. That's it from El Profesor, and I'll see you guys again next week as we look at the events happening in the post-World War II period.